Okay.
All right. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for being here. We're going to, let everybody filter in. I'm Jeff Holland, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to this month's VOP meeting. And this month, we are very happy to have Mr. Stuart Murphy, CBCP. Stuart does not have a military background, but he has spent the last decade being recruited, not applying. In December 2015, an internal recruiter at Jabil, and you're going to want to ask him how that name came about, found him on LinkedIn and reached out cold. That conversation led to 7.5 years there, where he built the company's global BC and DR program from scratch to ISO 22301 certification across 34 countries. What made recruiters act on what they found wasn't luck. It was 25 years of Fortune 100 BCDR leadership, a CBCP from our beloved DRI, FEMA certified exercise evacuator and proceed change manager credentials, and 50 plus industry conference presentations, all translated into a profile built to be found rather than to plead a case. And so with that very impressive start, Stuart, take it away. I will get out of everybody's hair.
Great. Thanks for the intro. I really appreciate that. Want to thank DRI and the VOP group for inviting me to speak today. Hopefully, we're going to bring some value and give everybody some tips on how they can improve their LinkedIn profiles and leverage that to be successful and transition from the military. So, couple of key things to start out with. I'm targeting 45 minutes with some time following that for Q&A. If you have questions as we move along, please put those in the chat. I believe Dan is going to keep an eye on those, and we'll make sure that we address your questions at the end. Additionally, Dan is also going to post my LinkedIn, my profile link in the chat, so please leverage that. Feel free to reach out and connect with me. Everybody that sends me a connection request, I will accept. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why that's a good thing. And I think that's probably about it. Before we jump too far into this, one key thing that we want to make sure everybody understands is we're not talking about tips for LinkedIn here. What we're talking about is translating your military background into something that civilian recruiters and hiring managers are going to be able to understand and make sense of and go ahead and leverage going forward. So the intro covered a lot of great tips on here. One of the key things though, and here's where we really want to stress, right, is, oops, pardon me. The second bullet on this list, the number of times that I was actually recruited by companies that turned into offers over the last decade it's been 5 different occasions, which have resulted in 3 different jobs, 2 that I turned down because they weren't a good fit. The point is, this kind of leverage and visibility is something that you can build into and make work for you. Okay, key things to remember, and here's what we're going to take a look at as we move through today. There's really 4 key pillars, if you will, for building your brand, building your strategy on LinkedIn, and really making that transition from your previous role into your next role. And as I mentioned on the slide here, each one of these pillars builds on the previous one. So what really makes sense is start at the beginning, work your way through the pillars, get to the end, and you will have built what you need. Now, as we kind of go into this, you're going to hear, as you start talking to people out in the industry, you're going to get a lot of feedback that says, well, hey, you really got to be doing this, you got to be doing that, you got to be posting every day, you got to be, there's a lot of things, the should be's, you should be doing this, that, and the other thing. Take a break, take a breath. That's a lot for anybody to be able to accomplish, particularly somebody who's coming from one career and transitioning to another. And diving into this, it doesn't make sense to try and eat the elephant all in one bite. So what we're going to talk through here today is some strategies on how you can get to where you need to go, but how you can do it in a ramp up kind of approach, right? That's going to be the key. And a little bit later, we're going to have an exercise, and we don't have to share the results of the exercise, although you can if you want, but start maybe giving some thought to what are a couple of key activities that I've been responsible for over the last several years that I would want to make sure I get listed on my profile. So just think about that, and we'll walk through each of these and get to that exercise in a little bit. So here's why everything matters. And the headline on this slide really tells the whole thing. You're If you've already started applying for positions and you're not getting any traction, a large part of that is due to the fact that you're not really being rejected, you're being skipped. That's important, and it's important to understand what that means. You're not being rejected because you don't have experience or because you don't fit somebody's idea of what they're looking for. The being skipped part is all about translation. And recruiters in today's environment really don't have a huge amount of time to be looking at resumes and trying to understand at a deep level what this particular individual has done in their experience and how that's going to land and help their organization. So the trick is translating it into something that resonates quickly with those recruiters and make sure that they grasp it. So if we look at the box on the left here, what are recruiters actually doing? Just imagine the huge amount of volume that anybody gets whenever they post a position, and they've got this opening, and they're probably going to get 10,000 resumes that come flying in the door. And the recruiters are using a couple of different methods to skim those resumes. First is there's a thing called ATS, which is an applicant tracking system. Most large organizations use those, and the ATS gets set up using keywords, so it'll review automatically any incoming resumes, and it'll reject anything that doesn't meet its kind of core requirements. Anything that's left over that has passed through the ATS then gets sent to a live recruiter, and they've got to look at it. But if they start out with 1,000 resumes and the ATS maybe rejects, let's say 900, so there's 100 left, it's 10% that have made it through. That's still one position that a recruiter has to go look through 100 resumes to try and determine which one of these I need to forward on to the hiring manager. And the recruiter doesn't want to just send them all over to the hiring manager, because now that's just shifting the problem to somebody else. And that's not really the way the process is supposed to work. So what ends up happening? Like the bullet point number one says, they skim a profile in seconds. So if you've got a resume, and you'll hear all kinds of terminology or definitions about, well, your resume should be 2 pages or 1 page or 3 page, whatever. That's less important. What's really important is the placement of things on the resume, and it needs to match your LinkedIn profile. And so today we're really focused on the LinkedIn profile, not building your resume, but they do the same thing with your LinkedIn profile. They're going to take a look, and it's the first couple of things on that LinkedIn profile that they're going to skim, and that's going to determine whether or not they continue to read. If they choose not to continue, you're missing an opportunity because you didn't capture those eyeballs in the first few seconds. So that's really important. Other key things that the recruiters actually do, and this is what has led to some of my success in the past, they search LinkedIn by keywords before they even post a job. So if they get a job requisition from a hiring manager, before they even advertise it, they're going to get on LinkedIn, they're going to go and find candidates that they think are a suitable match for that role. And what they're going to try and do is get those candidates in, get them into the interview process even before they advertise. Because if they don't have to advertise, that solves the problem or the workload challenge of 1,000 resumes coming in the door. So the key there is that visibility on LinkedIn is going to be absolutely crucial. One of my jobs that was mentioned on the intro, I went to work for a company called Jabil, and they're a global manufacturing company. I got a phone call from one of their in-house recruiters, uh, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas that year, and he said, "Hey, we've just created this position that we're about to post, uh, and it looks like you'd be a good fit for it." And the next thing you know, I'm having this conversation with this recruiter, and then I'm scheduled with a phone interview with the hiring manager. And by mid January, they flew me down to Florida to come and do face to face interviews. And I was on the job on February 29th, 2016. So it's that kind of visibility. That's the sort of events that you want to trigger. So that's what they're doing. They're looking on LinkedIn before they ever do anything, right? And as I mentioned, they're judging your fit right off your headline and the top three bullet lines. So the key here is being impactful and being impactful early in the process. That's really what you want to be able to accomplish. And the last item, most recruiters, unless they've got some military experience, and by the way, as we mentioned in the bio, I do not. So if I mess up on some acronyms or some military terms, please forgive me, and correct me in the chat. I'll I'll take the feedback. Not a problem. Um, but typically, unless they've got that experience, they don't know what your rank means, and they don't really know what your MOS code means. So that's not telling them anything. It is absolutely meaningful in your current role, but it's not going to be meaningful for them. So that's where this whole concept of translation comes in. So what this really means for you, if you look on the right hand side, each bullet has got a counter bullet, right? So um, when you take a look at it, if you have a strong record, but it's in a format that's not familiar to those recruiters, they're kind of reading that as well. Okay, I don't know what that is, so it doesn't really count for anything, right? They discount things fairly rapidly just because they can, right, or because they have to because of time press. And so ultimately, rolling this all up, the gap that we find for people transitioning from military background into a civilian role isn't the gap isn't your service. The gap is how do we translate what you were successful at in that military role to make it match up with a corresponding role in the civilian world. So that's the key. That's what we're going to talk about here today, and we'll kind of dive into some of that. So going on a little bit more about this translation and what the recruiters are looking for when they're online, when they're hitting LinkedIn and they're trying to find candidates. So in the past, and I've seen this before, I've seen LinkedIn profiles where people have utilized a military term for their particular job. So maybe they were a platoon sergeant or a logistics NCO. Nobody's searching for that, right? That's not, as a recruiter or as a hiring manager, I'm not going to go onto LinkedIn and I'm not going to say I'm looking for a platoon sergeant for two reasons. One, I don't have that kind of role, and two, I don't really know what a platoon sergeant does. So I'm not going to look for that because that's not really going to help me. I'm going to look for um, on my civilian equipment equivalent, right? I'm looking for an operations supervisor, somebody who's managed a team. Um, and that's where this whole translation thing comes in, right? So if you were a platoon sergeant, what does that mean on the civilian side of things? Oh, I managed a team. I was responsible for this. Um, that's where we want to go with these kinds of things. And you can see there's a few other examples on the screen here, um, but I want to kind of focus on the last one. So the PCS and slash deployment cycles, depending on how those are documented in your LinkedIn profile, recruiters could see those as gaps. And anytime they see sort of extended gaps, a few months or more without an explanation, then they see that as a red flag, and that's going to disqualify you from any further consideration. So, any of those kinds of things you want to make sure are well documented. You can say, I had this role, this is what I was responsible for, and it was this time period. And as long as you can do that and you account for all that time, then you're going to be, then you're going to be in much better shape. So think about this as we move forward. Just keep in your mind, think about quietly, think about what your own rank and title, as we're kind of walking through this concept, and think about what that's going to translate to potentially in a civilian role going forward, because that'll become the basis for the exercise that we're going to do in a little while. So here's the formula. And Dan, I should have asked you. Now I've got one, so I'm just checking on a timer. I want to make sure I stay on track. Um, so y- Key thing here, the translation formula, right, is you can see on the left-hand side, um, that I was responsible for platoon readiness and equipment accountability. All right, so that's great. What does that really mean? And what we want to do is we want to turn this into the after. I was an operations supervisor for a 40-person team responsible for $2 million in equipment and maintained percentage readiness rate across 3 rotations. So the goal here is what was the job? What was your scope? And what kind of measurable outcome did you have? Because ultimately, the outcome is what those recruiters are looking for. They're looking for, how did you make things better while you were there? That's really the key. All right. So LinkedIn, uh, it's on the internet, and the internet, as we know, never goes away. Um, I'm sure we've all got things out there that we would like to see disappear, but the ones that are out there, they're out there. So there's some key things that should not be on the internet, and they're worth talking about because they're really they're items that are kind of not going to help you. And the goal here is, we're going to do something. Everything that you do needs to be focused on one thing, and that's helping you and improving your visibility. So put some guardrails around what you can put out there. There's some points on here. I'm not going to belabor these. You folks all know what you can say and can't. Um, but stick to the things that are safe to quantify, right? What kind of outcomes, what your leadership scope was, skills and certifications, all those kinds of things are going to be important. All right, pillar two. So the header. This is really this. LinkedIn has a limit, I think, on a couple of hundred characters. It's not very long, so you'll have to be concise. But your headline is a search result. You don't want to put your job title in here, because if you put your current job title, that doesn't really tell anybody anything about where you're going. The goal here is, where are you going? So what you want to do is think about, what role do I want next? What does that look like, and how do I encapsulate that into a title? And so I've got a good example on the screen, and this is something that we see a lot of folks coming out of the military is, they'll put, I'm an Army vet or Navy vet, or whatever that happens to be, which, that's admirable, but it's not helpful. It's not going to help you into that next role. So you're taking up space in the limited amount of space that you've got, and talking about something that doesn't really help you get going in front of a recruiter. If we look at the after, now we've got a couple of things or 3 things that really focus on what your role looks like and where you can potentially go. And that headline, now, when a recruiter goes out to LinkedIn and they start looking at, hey, I need an operations manager. Well, if you've got this as your headline, your name's going to pop up. That's the goal. That's really where we want to be, right? Um, so make sure, get that out there. And if you've got, as you can see from the example, your what your target role is, what your expertise is, and what your credential or some kind of proof point. So, proof point in this case, transitioning U.S. Army officer, transitioning, however you want to say that, but that's a good proof point to have. But make sure you've got preceding that, you have those other components, which are really going to help you. Okay, pillar three, the story. This gets to be really kind of tricky because it forces us to do something that none of us is really good at. It's just kind of human nature that we don't do a real good job of tracking our accomplishments and making sure that we can really fully document them and say, hey, I did this and here's what the result was. Um, so this becomes a little bit more of a challenge. But what you want to do is utilize the STAR methodology. And this is a common approach for LinkedIn, resumes, and ultimately when you transition into a civilian role and you're working for some corporation, they're going to use this methodology for your annual review as well. And so it becomes very common. So you might as well start getting used to it and employ it as much as you can. For good examples, there's plenty of LinkedIn profiles out there you can take a look at. Mine is far from perfect and could use some updating, but there are some good examples on mine. So you can go take a look at that. But basically, what you want to do is you want to start with the star, which is your situation, and that provides some context. What was the challenge or the mission or the problem that you were tasked with solving, right? The next thing is what you were specifically responsible for as it relates to that. Following that is the action. What did you do to either a resolve the situation if it was something that needed resolving, or to improve the situation if it was something that had the potential for improvement? What do you do? So this is a verb, right? We want to say I did X. That's what we're trying to get across here. And then ultimately, and this is I'm going to harp on this again, ultimately is the result. And that's why this one's a different color, because at the end of the day, the recruiters and the hiring managers, it's great to have experience. What they're really looking for is somebody who produces results. And if you can document those results and say, well, I improved, uh, we reduced failure rates from 35% to 25%, resulting in a 10% um, increase in uptime or a 10% reduction in failure rates. That's something tangible. Somebody's going to look at that and go, okay, that's what we need. So those are the key things that you want to make sure you kind of work through as you're working through your bullet points. Now, having said that, you're going to get to a point, and this happens to everybody when they're updating their LinkedIn profile or doing their resume. Some bullet points really defy your ability to make them fit this model. And so you have to make some decisions and you have to say, I'm going to live with that because it highlights a specific experience, even though there's no measurable outcome, or I'm going to throw it in the trash and I'm going to reword it, or I'm going to put something else in its place. So there are some decision points that you're going to have to. Not every bullet point is going to be successfully translated into this STAR methodology, but then you're making an informed decision about whether you keep it or come up with something new. But it's absolutely worth thinking about, and it's something you got to push through the process. So in practice, here's kind of an example. Here's what several profiles I've seen have said. Somebody's responsible for maintenance scheduling and supply coordination for a motor pool. Okay. Um, with your background, you know what that means. But if you're going into a technology company, for example, they're going to look at that and they're going to kind of go, okay, I'm not really sure what that is and how that how that impacts us or how it can benefit us. So this is where you move into the star version. So if you look at the bottom half of the screen, our situation, motor pool supporting 120 vehicle fleet. What's my task? I own the maintenance, scheduling, and parts supply. What's the action? I rebuilt the process, cross-trained junior staff. What was the result? Reduced average downtime 22%, past 3 consecutive readiness inspections. That right there tells somebody exactly what you did and what the outcome was. And that's going to help them go, okay, I can see where we can utilize that skill set. There's process improvement, there's training. So there are several different skills that are now bubbling up to the surface, which I wouldn't have thought of just based on the previous statement. Don't know why the click doesn't want to work. There we go. Okay. So still working on our story. There's four kind of main things that really undo that star, the bullet points. And number one, I talked about this a lot. This is really important. There's no number. So if you say something about, well, I improved efficiency, okay, yeah, that's great. But does it really tell anybody anything? Not really, because there's no measurement. There's no, we went from 10% efficiency to 15% efficiency. Okay, now that says something. It says there's an improvement and you improved it 50%. Well, with no with no quantifying numbers, it's a waste of space. And as I stated earlier, when recruiters, when they're looking at your profile and they're looking at your resume, space is critical. You got to use what you have, and it needs to be the most impactful way possible. And that space that you have is at the very top of the screen on your LinkedIn profile that we talked about. The header, the description, and those first few bullet points. That's going to be really critical, because if you don't have any of this supporting concepts like these numbers, good star bullets, it's not going to keep their interest, and excuse me, they're going to move on. Number two, jargon. Um, every every organization, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a government organization, whether it's the Army or the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, it's any corporation, everybody has their own jargon. Every industry specialization has got its own jargon. Get rid of it. You need to stay away from that as much as you possibly can, because none of those things really help somebody who's not in that role understand what you're talking about, right? So anybody who looks at my LinkedIn profile, it's got my name. It says Stuart Murray, comma CBCP, which is my DRI certification, and followed by another certification, which is also an acronym. Doesn't mean anything to anybody who is not in the industry unless they specifically have a role where they're looking for those certifications. So there's limited value to that. So that jargon, keep that to a minimum. Tasks, no results. We talked a lot about that. That's really, tasks without a result are sort of like ongoing activities. I could say, all right, I got up at 7 o'clock every day this week. What does that tell us? Not much, right? What did I do as a result of getting up at 7 o'clock every morning? If I didn't do anything with the time gained, especially if I normally got up at 8 o'clock, and I got up at 7 every day this week, all right, I can turn that around and I can say, instead of, or I increased my daily output by 1 hour by getting up 1 hour earlier every day and was able to accomplish this extra task or this extra outcome. Remember, this whole thing is all about outcomes. It's what you've done is great. That's the momentum that needs to lead you into those outcomes. What did I actually accomplish at the end of the day? And the second thing is or fourth thing, the buried lead. So when you're creating your bullet points, uh, try to be succinct and maybe keep them to couple of sentences, three at the most. Because if you're starting to ask recruiters to read a lot, they're not going to. They don't have the time, and therefore they don't have the inclination. Their job is to put bodies in seats, not to read somebody's detailed resume or LinkedIn profile, right? They want to be able to get their job done quickly because they've got 50 more they have to get done that day. So the key is don't bury anything, keep it succinct, get to the point right off the bat. And so you could you could start, if we go back to the earlier slide where we have that translation formula, right? You could actually start with the result. You could say achieved, I think one of the examples I had in an earlier slide was achieved 98% readiness over uh, 3 cycles. You could start with that and then say by doing X, Y, and Z. So that would, it just kind of reverses the star, starts you with the result, but it gives you everything that you need in that one sentence or 2 sentences. So that's an important approach to take. Let's see. Okay. All right. So the daily checklist. Uh, like I said earlier, lots of, if you start Googling this, you're going to get a lot of great advice. And it's a little bit overwhelming, particularly for people who are really just kind of getting started with LinkedIn. If you're a LinkedIn vet already, you've been using it, then great. You're in good shape. But if you're just starting out, try not to become overwhelmed by this whole daily checklist of, well, you need to do these 5 things every day and you're going to spend 2 hours online. You really don't. I never did. And obviously, based on the results that I've had, I've reached some level of success with this. So the key here is start small, start where you are. So wherever you are, we're going to start there and now kind of move forward. And a couple of things, and here's what a lot of people tend to forget about, ramping up and going, okay, I got this 25-point checklist I need to do every day. Do you have a network? That's a key question. If you don't, then it doesn't really matter what you do because nobody's going to see it. So what really becomes important is thinking about the order of operations here and saying, okay, well, maybe I need to start working on my network. How do I go about doing that? There's a good place to get started. Um, and writing an article. Some people suggest, well, you need to write an article every couple week, every couple days, or you should post one a week, or what have you. I try to get one every couple weeks. It's okay. I'd like to do more, but I don't have the time. That's all right. So writing an article though requires some opinion and your point of view or perspective on something topical. You typically don't have that day one, right? So that's something that you're going to build over time. So don't try to accomplish that goal right off the bat. It's a big one. It's easy to miss. And if too many of these things you're trying to tackle all at one time, you start missing a few, then it starts to look more like failure than success. And really success is about a step one, step two, step three kind of process. So we want to do that. Let's see. I want to kind of move it along a little bit here, pick up my pace. So we're going to jump on this. So 30, 60, 90-day visibility for Peer 4. Here's my recommendation. Day 1 to 30, you're going to start your foundation. So get your profile put together, get your header, and get those start bullets put together. And then once you've got that, now you've got some kind of robust, this is me, right? um, Start connecting with former unit members or transition program peers and second degree recruiters. Now, ideally, recruiters, you want to get more of those connections as much as you possibly can because those people have got visibility like you wouldn't believe. And excuse me, part of what you also want to do in this first 30 days is comment on 2 or 3 posts a week. You don't actually have to post. Just when you see something, somebody that you're connected to comments and says something, add a meaningful comment to that, something that adds some value to their comment. It's nice to say, hey, great comment, Joe, but that's not really productive. And the LinkedIn algorithm kind of ignores you if you do things like that. So really what you want to be able to do is you want to add some value to it. And you say, hey, that was a great point, Joe, but I've also found X, Y, and Z to be relevant. What are your thoughts? Now you've added some value to the conversation. You're continuing that conversation. So those are the kinds of things that you want to be focusing on your first 30 days. Second 30 days, as you can see, now we're talking about more engagement. So you want to up your comments. You want to share 1 post a week. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. You can go and you can look online and you can see what people have done. And sometimes they're brief, sometimes they're a little more lengthy, whatever fits, right? Start following target companies that you're interested in and their recruiters. And then days 61 to 90, now you're starting to get into posting your original content. Um, and that's not always an announcement. That's some kind of lesson. So something that you've learned somewhere in your experience that could be a valuable learning opportunity for somebody else. That's the kind of thing that LinkedIn is looking for. Comment daily where relevant. Doesn't have to be every day. This is not a I got to do this every day. Ideally, if you're on there daily in the third part of this trimester, that's good, but make use of that time. So that's where you want to comment. And then consider an article once you've got a specific point of view that you feel like you can defend, because people on LinkedIn will comment on it and they'll argue with you. So you want to be in a position of saying, I said this, I stand by it because my experience has shown X, Y, and Z, and I can defend that. That's the position that you want to be in on creating content. Okay, here's your realistic weekly mix once you get past day 60, right? So we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on this slide because you all can have the slide presentation and the notes are in there. But the key here is start out with 30 to 45 minutes a week. A week. It's like 5 or 10 minutes a day, right? Is going to get you what you need. Follow that formula and it doesn't become a major problem or a major challenge, or it doesn't become something really onerous where, oh God, I got to go do this, I hate this. You don't want it to be at that point. And then as you kind of grow and you expand your network, you'll find that you get a little more engaged kind of as you go through the process, right? And so you might find that you spend a little more time at it, which is totally okay too. Um, it's just, but you got to do what's right for you. And it's like the old saying goes, right? You can't eat the elephant in one bite. You got to start one bite at a time, and away you go. But this really applies once you get past day 60. Those first 60 days, those are the foundational periods. That's where you're building yourself, building your brand, and kind of you're cycling with the training wheels, right? Once you get past day 60, okay, training wheels are coming off, and you're running a lot more on the two-wheeler. So I talked about previously, and we're a little short on time here. So what I'm going to say is take this exercise. We won't have time to go through this whole thing here today, but take this exercise, apply that formula that we talked about. And if you feel like it, if you've got something that comes up, pop it in the chat. Otherwise, keep this as a takeaway for you, something that you can do after. Share it with a spouse, your partner, somebody else, and say, does this make sense to you? And that's the key. You want to get somebody who's not in your role to look at it and go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I understand what you did. That's going to be key. So pardon me, 5 mistakes that are going to keep this from working, right? we talked about the headline. You got to make sure that you want that to be the target role, listing your duties instead of results. Nope. Get into the STAR concept. Um, Trying to do the full daily activity plan on day one. Don't do that because it's overwhelming. Um, Posting unit level or operational specifics, information that shouldn't be public. Don't do that. And connecting only with other veterans. This last point is probably the most important on the page. It's great to stay connected with the folks that you worked with previously. That's always good. However, your goal here is transition. And part of that transition means making some new connections and branching out and getting into those target industries that you're really interested in. And so, one of the ways that you can do that is connect with more people who are maybe in a role or affiliated with a role or in an organization that you're interested in. Get connected with them on LinkedIn. And that expands your network because now anything that you do, they're going to see. And if they comment or like it, their their network will then see it. So, as an example, if you're connected to me on LinkedIn and you post something or you make a comment on somebody else's post, I'm going to see it. And if I comment on it, or even if I hit the like button, then the 3,100 people that I'm connected to on LinkedIn will also see it. And it starts to become exponential from there. And so you can leverage that to your advantage because that's the networking multiplier that you really need. Think of it as a force multiplier, right? You're now being able to reach out to potentially thousands of people who may not be they might not be your next manager or your next your next leader or whatever. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the exposure and getting that out in front of as many people as possible, particularly in today's world. That's a key element. Okay, so takeaways. What to do this week? And I say this week, all right, we're rolling into the weekend, but this coming week, before too much time goes by, you want to jump on these things, because otherwise we all end up, oh, I'll do it next week, and you know how it is, doesn't get done. So work through these bullet points, get those knocked out, and start working on that LinkedIn profile. And again, I'm going to volunteer that anybody that's on this call today, send me a connection request on LinkedIn. I will accept it. And if you want some help, reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you, um, to the best of my ability. And there we go. That's it. So, Dan, if we've got some questions, let's jump into those. Can't hear anybody.
Yeah, sorry, looks like I wasn't on stage. I was observing them. Yeah, so we don't have any questions in the chat right now, but thinking about what you had discussed inside of your pieces, I could throw some questions at you. If Keith doesn't have any questions, I'll let Keith go first if he's got any. You're on mute, or your mic's not working. Yeah, it looks like your mic's not working. So yeah, no problem. I'll throw some questions in for you. I do a lot of mentoring in the space, with the group here, and just thinking about our population in general. We have all military professionals in here that are transitioning into specialist roles, right? This is we're talking about BC, DR, off res, anything that's in that space. It's a specialist role, and I always tell my mentees that you are like a surgeon because you've got a primary care provider. They do a little bit of everything, but you're not going to go to your PCM and say, hey, can you do some brain surgery on me? You're going to go to the specialist surgeon. And it's like that where you've got a project manager. And I think across the space, let me know what you think about this. If I'm going in, I'm crafting my bullets and I say, hey, I was like the ops manager and I did this many things and I feel like what I did, how I did it, what the impact was, follow on that STAR method. But if I'm not talking the professional practices or the frameworks that are aligned with my skill set that I'm trying to achieve, I'm probably not going to get those hits for a specialist role. I'll get the PM ones all day, every day, but you're going to kind of out yourself. And what's your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. There's the targeting specialist roles. You've got to do, taking that star methodology that I was talking about and putting your bullet points. You really want to craft your experience and what you've done and your accomplishments with things that are meaningful for that specialized role, right? So, as much as we can, we want to target that. And if we're looking at, roles that are in the business continuity realm, then any experience that you've had previously that has got anything to do with resiliency or crisis management, you can tweak that, you can craft that, and that's something that adds some value to that business continuity role. So it definitely has to be specific. You can't, unless you're looking for a generalist role, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think we got a question in the chat. I got your audio now, Keith. You want to take that chat away?
Changed it over. So yeah, is a question here, and I can read that out. But Christopher was asking, for those open to either government or civilian roles, can you frame how your LinkedIn profile meets the intent for both sides? I think that's a little bit of a tricky one, but if you guys want to take that one.
That's a challenge because typically government roles, they've got different sets of requirements, but I don't think it's impossible. It's going to be a little bit of it's probably going to be a little less specific than you might otherwise do, right? So the role or your description might be a little bit broader, and a little bit more general than it might otherwise be, so that you can easily have a foot in both camps. The key thing here, though, is regardless, your LinkedIn profile is not doing all the work. Remember, that's a visibility generator, right? That's not your actual resume. So at some point, you're going to have to submit a resume, and that's where you can get really specific. So if you're submitting a resume for a government role, you can really tailor your resume to that particular role and its requirements. Same as if it's in the private sector. So that's what I would stay focused on.
Yeah, Stuart, I think you hit on.
This.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I challenge you this: if you're going on your LinkedIn and you're trying to get picked up for a government role, like attract the hiring managers from a government hiring manager, it's not going to happen on LinkedIn. They're not looking, unless you're like a rocket scientist. They're not looking for BCs. They're going to get that inside their normal job recs and normal job boards. They don't have the time and the resources like regular large scale corporate enterprises to go and have that.
Right. Right.
No, that's a fair point. And Stuart, I like some of the key points that you brought up, is that you need to be looking at putting what the role is that you're currently wanting to get into, not the one that you were. And that's a lot of times is that we're transitioning military members to put in that BC lingo. And I use the analogy all the time. It's like if you're going vehicle shopping and you're like, hey, I'm Farmer Joe and I want a pickup truck, and it has to have XYZ, it has to have, a lift kit and these tires and this towing capacity. And you get up and you talk to the salesperson, they're like, I got this BMW, it's got Bluetooth, it's got heated seats, you're going to love it. And you're like, yeah, you lost me. It's like the same thing applies in the industry. It's like you tell them, hey, I was a readiness NCO and worked logistics over here, this or that. And it's like, yeah, I'm just looking for a business continuity manager. And it's like, well, you lost me again, so. But the other piece that you brought up too, I thought was really good is the strongest piece here with leveraging other people is finding who are your top people in the industry that have a huge following and making that a force multiplier. And I think we always, foot stomp it that you can't make enough cold calls. And I'll tell people, don't be intimidated by strangers in the industry. A lot of people are willing to reach out and help you. And if you tell them who you are and what you're trying to accomplish, they'll say, hey, shoot me your resume. I'd like to look at it. Maybe we got a few open positions for you. You open a lot of opportunities, but growing that network, I see a lot of veterans that don't put enough effort into, properly managing their LinkedIn so that they can get it leveraged. I mean, the the unfortunate piece here is that a lot of people will apply to 60 to 100 jobs and they're just playing with the ATS. They're not actually getting, their face in someone else's or in front of someone else's face. So I think that's the most important piece is the networking.
Absolutely. And so there's a question here from Josh. Says we didn't mention anything about the green banner and LinkedIn Premium. Does that change your visibility? Great question. Love it. And the answer is yes. The green banner does change your visibility because it now opens your profile up to recruiters who are searching on LinkedIn, and indicate, because they'll go and search, hey, show me everybody who's got this certification and is currently open to work, and boom, there your name is coming up. You'll see some people on LinkedIn, I've seen this all over social media the last few years, saying using the green banner makes you look desperate. There's no evidence to support that claim. So I think that's just a personal choice, right? I use it. I have used it in the past, and I think it's a contributing factor in my success. So definitely don't be afraid. And the other part of your question, Josh, on the LinkedIn Premium, there are several advantages to LinkedIn Premium. I use it. One of which is it gives you more. I can't remember what the total number is, but it gives you more direct messaging or in-mail capabilities than you would have on the free version. So you're able to reach out to more people that you're not connected to, like recruiters. You can send them a direct note or a hiring manager. Whereas I think with the free version, you're limited to 5 a month, which is not a lot. So if you've got the budget, then yeah, I'm a big advocate. I'd go ahead and use it.
Actually, with the
Yeah, definitely.
military, they get it premium for a whole year.
Yeah.
Oh,
And definitely with your premium, it's going to help you out with getting those inside levers. Like, say I'm interested in a job. I see someone that's military inside that organization. I can connect with them, and I can actually send them a message. First, I got to ask to connect before I can send them a message. But when you come back to the green banner, this is really important, especially when you're trying to attract the hiring managers finding you before you got to find a role. Hiring managers, when they have an open rec, they open their board, and you can see it on LinkedIn. I've actually looked at, from my company, their hiring manager's view of LinkedIn. They filter. They can see, is this person active? Do I want to reach out to somebody if they're not active? Because maybe they aren't even on their LinkedIn ever. So that activity shows a flag on their filters. Then they can see, is this person open to work? So that is one other filter there. If you go onto a company's profile, you can say, I'm interested in working for this company. So we'll checkbox you do. That also will flag up on the thing. And then they start narrowing it down into groupings. And then they might say, I've got 20 people, I'm going to reach out to these people direct. Versus if I've got 100 people, I'm just waiting for them to come get. So that's that filtering there. Everything you're doing is putting yourself in more visibility for those hiring managers. And this question you have right here should be the last question, because he's got to jump out, right?
yeah. So if you don't put a green banner, you can open to work visible only to recruiters. Yeah, good comments from Samuel. And the green banner, do it or don't. I don't know. I'm a big believer in visibility, so anything that makes it more visible, I think is a good thing, and there's probably very little downside to it. That's my thought process. But hey, it's a personal thing. So understand what it gets you. That's the key. As long as you know what you might not be taking advantage of. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, and I do have another meeting I got to run to. Last call, I put my LinkedIn profile link in the chat session. Feel free to connect with me and reach out if you have questions. And if I can be of any assistance, I'm happy to do that too.
Well, thanks, Stuart. I really
Stuart, thanks a
appreciate
lot.
you joining us, and it's been some valuable insight, and appreciate your time. And my apologies for coming in late. I was just jumping off a last minute IT call, so I appreciate you guys being able to support.
Yeah, well, we all have real jobs here, so that's the hazards, right? So, thanks, Keith. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who attended. Hopefully, I'll have an opportunity to catch up with some of you in the near future.
Thanks
All
for
right.
having me on. And for anyone in the audience, make sure you connect with Stuart. Make sure you connect with people like Stuart. Keith, you found Stuart through connecting like this. This is how you build your network. This is how you learn to be a VC, learning from great VCs and learning those terminologies. That's how you're going to be able to craft those excellent bullets that target the right people for the industry the way it's at right now. So make sure you're getting out there and not just stopping at Stuart. Get on Google, type in whatever company you like, business continuity director, LinkedIn, and then go find that person, connect with them. VCs love to chat. We're all chatty Cathy's, so you need to be out there expanding. And don't just stick to military people. You get the civilian side too. They are excellent VCs on both sides of the deal.
Awesome. Great points. Well, thanks everyone, and let's call it a wrap.
All right. See y'all later.
All right. Take care.